at me. I'm like,
Okay.
I can't just ignore you and then start talking about, going off on this huge thing about like the God image or something. I don't know what the fuck we're gonna talk about today, but like, I just don't. I strive to have that level of self-consciousness.
Do you have a particular urge to pick one? Okay, so I was thinking, I was listening to the Malice podcast, the most recent one, where they're both dressed as dictators.
Yeah, I was listening to that yesterday too.
Yeah. So I was sharpening up my conversational mind this morning, listening to that. They are starting to get into pacifism now, and Michael Malice's case for pacifism, which is a case very dear to my heart because I fancy myself a pacifist.
Yeah.
And Martin Luther King comes up briefly, and what he did with pacifism to confront America with its attitudes about race.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, there's like the most dangerous topic I could bring up right now is classes of subhumans throughout history, classes of subhumans that we may not have encountered yet in the future. For example, if the apes of our planet radically jump a few rungs up the evolutionary ladder before our very eyes and start exhibiting markedly subhuman characteristics, at what point do we have to extend human rights to this population? And it's the exact same question that is much more current with AI. At what point with generalized artificial intelligence, or is that the letter? Is that the letter combo?
Yeah,
Isn't it
or
AGI?
AGI, artificial general intelligence.
At what point in the development of AGI are we responsible with extending human rights to that population? And what's it going to look like when there's a gray area where they're literally subhuman?
Or superhuman, depending on how fast they pass through the subhuman stage.
Well, that's too scary to even... That makes us subhuman in relation.
No, it makes us sub-AGI. We're still human. I mean, we're using...
If we met a population that was super human, we would be subhuman by comparison.
Well, only if you're taking the word human to mean the most highest known form of consciousness as its definition.
Well, that's what we take human to mean.
Incidentally, because we observe ourselves to be the most smartest animals, right? But I think that if we were to encounter aliens that were more intelligent than us, then it would make sense to just maintain the definition of sort of like the intelligence of humans as sort of what we, because like beyond, I mean, I don't know, it's just difficult, I think, to qualify like what are all the dimensions of intelligence, because there might be some aspects of human intelligence that are like more highly advanced than the, like I imagine, like what if we encounter some aliens and they have much better technology, but for some reason humans have like way more empathy than they do. Like humans are able to mirror each other's states a lot better than some more technically advanced civilization. At that point, it's like you have to break the qualification of intelligence into different dimensions. So I think just because that's just like a huge thicket of conceptual problems, it just makes sense to to define human normative, or I should say, normatively, where you just say, well, whatever humans are, humans, as in biological human beings, the qualities that they share is what human intelligence is. Human shouldn't have a definition that is general or is abstract in my view.
I
Just
completely disagree.
okay, but I hope you understand that my argument for this is purely a way of avoiding just this is just like a definition that I would prefer to promote semantic clarity and avoid thickets of. But I'm interested to hear why you don't think that's a good idea.
I think you have to define human in abstract terms because we're going to meet other free will consciousnesses at some point, and the ability to see them as human is crucial to achieving communication. So, human has to be a concept that we expand, and that depends on things that aren't dependent on biology, that aren't dependent on relative intelligence. The definition of human needs to be something more abstract and more pointed at free will,
Mm-hmm.
more pointed at the ability to grow the more you act, grow in responsive free will intelligence the more you use it. If you can learn as you go, then you're more human.
So to me, that sounds like the concept of sentience. Can we just take sentience to be the general quality that conscious beings share, and then reserve human intelligence for like the peculiar aspects of what makes human, like the archangel monkey demon specific special human blend kind of
But
type.
that's just Earth. That's just how humans happen to look on Earth.
Yeah, well, humans are only on Earth, so
That's you cannot definitively say that.
no, but I can fairly confidently say that because if that's so, how would there be humans? Are you saying that okay, so unless there is like some seriously intense like panspermia, um like human DNA, like, well, like I think in Star Trek there was like this little contrived plot point that tried to explain why all the aliens were humanoid. It was because like they were like seeded with similar DNA like sometime in the distant past. Unless
I'm
there's
po-
something really crazy like that going on.
I'm pointing out that free will and sentience is the crucial human gene, not the local aspect that we happen to have saddled that gene onto monkeys instead of onto octopi.
Hmm. No, yeah, I see what you're saying. You're taking human to mean sentience.
Yes.
Yes, and I'm just saying, well, why not just take sentience to mean sentience, and then because you would agree though that there is some value in having a category that describes just the observed nature of humanity as
Yeah.
opposed to the ideal.
Earth human.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
Just pointing out which locality your evolutionary chain has originated in. Um, it, my favoring the word human over sentience is because of the empathy that's generated
Mm,
there. The only way to communicate with someone you have every instinctual animal lizard brain excuse to name as other, the only
yeah.
way to bridge that into communication is empathy. Calling them human and focusing on human to human characteristics independent of physical changes is like it's the same as arguments for being colorblind in a more racially diverse integrated world. Like there's something abstract and universal to us. It doesn't matter if we look the same, doesn't matter if we have the same history. We both have sentience. We both have the ability to achieve sovereignty. We both have some set of natural rights.
Yeah. I think that we um, we like to is we sort of we already are quite uh, like liable to extend humanness to things that we like such as cats, which is why people say like cats are just people. Like in a certain sense, cats are people. If you look at a cat in a certain way, it's like a person. And I've had that experience. I had that experience like 2 days ago. Actually, I was looking at a cat and I was like, "This is a little. It's a person that's a cat." So I don't know. I guess I'm just that it speaks to what you're saying. There's certainly there's something natural, I think, about there's something empathetic about extending this idea of humanness to or just like not being afraid of using that word. I get what you're saying. I do.
So
Um,
what do you think a monkey would have to do to prove to you that that monkey that monkey had free will and deserved property rights
well,
and,
so I
and
think
freedom of speech
I think that the monkey.
and was also liable to punishment if they hurt somebody
Oh,
because
see, that's where
now they
that,
have free will.
that's where it gets tricky. I was about ready to grant the monkey everything, um, including especially property rights. Uh, uh, I mean, for real though, the property rights would have to be defined. Okay, so when the actually, I won't take this as a joke. I'll take this seriously. So the monkey. This is a good question, by the way. So the monkey, um, uh, I think would express the or like the monkey would have these rights, but it would be expressed in a little bit different way than it is for humans, as a reflection of the way that the monkey's way of seeing the world is different. Like, I think that you can draw a pretty strong analogy to um, habitat destruction as being the infringement of the property rights of orangutans, for instance, like in Indonesia, where the rainforest is being cut down to make way for palm oil plantations, and it's driving the orangutans to extinction in
And
that
that's
area.
no problem because there are no humans in
Uh,
that area.
well, it's not a problem.
It's
I
not
mean,
mo-
I think there's plenty of people who think it's a problem, but I mean, what do you have when you have the combination of a, you know, multinational corporation and a corrupt third world government? You don't usually have. Uh,
but it's not a human rights crisis that the orangutans are being shoved around.
no, it's an orangutan rights crisis. Um, yeah, those orangutans have lived there, and their entire existence is predicated upon having a place that's their own, and it's being destroyed. So I think that there's already like there's an ecological viewpoint that already kind of encapsulates the idea of certain rights for animals. I think animals are less individuated, so they have less abstract expressions of the rights. I think that like the prop to speak of property rights for a specific orangutan, I think doesn't make as much sense to talk about the property rights of the species or a population because that's in the animals are much more integrated with each other. They're not split apart the way humans are.
Okay, so if an orangutan started individuating, would that then start to convince you that they were deserving individual human rights?
Yes, I think it
If
would.
if one started declaring itself as an individual,
Yes,
even independent of the rest of his orangutan brothers
right.
and sisters, he would then, if he started individuating, he would then become human and not orangutan.
If they did, yeah.
As far as the word of law is concerned.
If there was an orangutan that emerged from the forest one day and said, "I'd like to speak to the zookeepers, please," and then
Yes.
you'd say, I'd say take that orangutan and get that monkey a social security number ASAP.
Yeah.
Get that monkey a bank account and get that monkey no for real. Like that would be the most wildest thing that's like honestly that's a pretty crazy sci-fi
See,
concept.
see, I
Is animals like stepping into the human world voluntarily?
See, I think the danger there from the liberal side of things is activist groups rushing to extend those things to creatures that haven't started individuating yet. But just out of the romantic notion of it, they want to start a liberal activist group might start naming orangutans and giving them social security numbers
Okay.
without them actually wanting or knowing what any of that means.
I feel like that's a fairly minor threat, though. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't. Is that really? I don't know how much of a danger there is to extending rights to animals because
That gets to a very dangerous subject though, because that's the attitude people had about letting women vote before they were allowed to contribute to first world society.
no,
Um,
I'm saying I don't think there's anything dangerous about extending rights to animals.
I'm speaking to the attitude
Oh, gotcha.
that
Okay.
it could be dangerous.
Yes.
Like from that attitude, in the example of women voting or not, someone who is against that would be, why are you extending human rights to people who haven't shown the ability to think for themselves or think rationally yet?
Mm.
Like, women want to vote, okay, they have to prove to society that they're rationally thinking individuals and not these subhuman cum buckets that I, as some theoretical chauvinist like male in the before times, like think they're not fully human, so they don't deserve human rights until they prove their humanness.
I imagine that the I'm just trying to I'm trying to put myself into the shoes of someone who uh, like let's say like living in like 1900 or something who believes that um, women shouldn't have the right to vote. Um, I think that probably the way people rationalized it to themselves, maybe, was that they thought, well, democracy is a mechanism that you translate the will of the populace to public representation. And back in those days, there was a much stronger mapping between women and a man who sort of legally and officially represented them,
Yeah.
like it is still in like Saudi Arabia or some other places, like backward places in the world. So um, it was probably easier to think like, okay, well, women could vote, but what's the point? Because women, are you saying women's vote is represented by their husband because of course women agree with their husband,
Right.
and most women have husbands except for like like harlots or whatever,
And
you know
if they aren't married yet, then they haven't proven that they're an individual upright citizen yet.
yeah, they're not part of society or something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah. And so I think that kind of, just back in those days when the things were more, society was less, like yeah, just less modern. It was I think much easier to make that assumption that you could just, you didn't need to have a democracy wasn't, you didn't need a high resolution picture like you do now, because people now are really in some ways much more radically different and diverse, and there's yeah, that wouldn't fly. It wouldn't fly today because there's entire issues that completely split the vote between like women and men. So you can't assume that you can't use men's presence as a representation of women. I think it's probably a bit of a self-reinforcing system. Like, I have no doubt that having that policy in effect kept things that way, probably longer than it would have naturally been, anyways. But yeah,
Yeah, in such a situation, in such a historical frame like that, the women are just as much responsible for keeping that system going forward as the men.
yeah.
But
Oh, I'm sure many of them supported it.
because most of the women believed all
Yeah,
those cultural assumptions about them being somehow inferior or like
of course.
needing to refer to a man to have agency and sovereignty.
Of course, yes.
And it wasn't a generalized movement on the part of women. It was a very small handful of very masculine women that set out to prove that whatever other women think, these individuals are individuals first and women second. While most women would in those times have completely disagreed with that feminist.
Um, I think that it's interesting that you say masculine women because I wonder if it's a bit more general than that. I think that
You could say aggressive.
sure, yeah, aggressive, and maybe certainly at the time, still, honestly, yeah, that's incidentally, yeah, that's definitely associated with the way masculinity functions. It's a man's world, politics is and has been, and I think that the only way politics is going to not be a man's world is if it becomes nobody's world, and that's kind of where we're heading right now. Is it's becoming it's sort of getting away from humans entirely. So maybe the next iteration of representation is we'll start from like a little bit cleaner of a slate and won't have to deal with all the historical entropy, which could be a huge benefit, I think, and could, almost like lay the foundations for the next phase of giving like credence or like enfranchising sentience, or let's say this more broader conception of human. Yeah, because we sort of have to anyways. Like if you imagine that in the next 200 years, there's going to be machines that are pushing the boundaries of what's considered, like that are easily passing the Turing test and all this stuff like that. It makes sense to sort of prepare the political system to handle that. And I think that something like voting, where you have one person, one vote, is entirely untenable with extending human rights to, because like let's say that you can create an artificially a intelligent machine that has human rights. Okay, so can they vote? So then can you just create 1,000,000 copies of this now and they all can vote? How's that going to work, right? So just from a
Well,
purely
each
Mhm.
one in that hypothetical, each one needs to prove that they're an individual node, unique from their seeding clone.
Okay, so let's say that they did that and they could easily do that and they all did it. You think all of them should be able to vote?
Because it's such an unprecedented situation, I guess each one would have to prove their individuality.
And if they did, then they could have a say in what happened in the world politically.
Yes, but
So then,
that's such a mind fuck because you project that backwards into the past, and that's not what we did. There was some benefit of the doubt move that had to be made. That,
yeah,
well, even though this population over there hasn't proved their individuality, we need to extend the benefit of the doubt that they are individuals like us prior to them even showing it. But like that seems very dangerous in this future projection where to extend that human to human hand of camaraderie before it's been shown to be warranted
right.
could cause the destruction of the human race.
Yeah, especially if you had the ability to create an arbitrary number of copies
Yes.
of this intelligence. Because,
Yeah.
like, let's say someone's like, well, the population, it's not favorable for me right now. The demographics are not favorable. Okay, well, I'm just going to like produce 100 million new individual intelligences.
I think
And,
the only objective way to the only way to
mhm.
objectively determine this humanness is face to face connections, because that's the only objective thing you can be sure of is
Yes.
when you're in front of another human,
Yes.
you know what that is. And when it's not that, you know what the uncanny valley feels like.
Hmm.
But by that same instinct of knowing when the uncanny valley is there, you know when you're seeing another fucking human.
Yes.
And only an individual rational mind can make that discernment. Uh, Policy can't make that discernment. Only individuals who have met other individuals know whether that other individual is a human or not.
Yeah, I think you're touching on something that I think is very important, which is that it's a little better to define or to measure individuality and intelligence by its expression rather than uh, just pointing to it and labeling it. I think the way that people form connections with each other is, in some sense, the substance of society and politics more so even than the people themselves in isolation. Because if no one talked to each other and there was no one had any relationships with anyone, there wouldn't be society, like by definition, right? Like it's in the word society, social. It's the state of connections. It's literally like denotatively stating what it's referring to, which is the relationship among the parts, not the parts themselves. And of course, to the extent that those relationships um, benefit or harm any individual members, then it becomes sort of like a personal politics where it's like, well, what do I want to happen? Like, am I getting my fair shake here? But that's not really, I think, what's at stake with the idea that like non-human or let's say non-biologically human things could become enfranchised. It's the destabilization of the system that we use to get along with each other, and that's kind of like in a sense already happening a little bit, I think, because like even though there isn't artificial general intelligence, there definitely are. I mean, like bots, like fake accounts, trolls. You know what I mean? Like that
Yeah.
kind of like bad faith actors are like the first shot in this war for um uh sort of like of like shaping the course of where humans kind of collective like where our consensus reality is going to go evolving into the future. um, that's that kind of bad faith acting, I think, is phony, right? And you can probably, you could draw a parallel to a system that impersonated a human that wasn't actually a person that could still pass the Turing test. And there would be a very convincing argument, I think, to look at that as basically a bad faith attempt to represent humanity. So I have to admit, I'm a little bit skeptical of quickly extending like human rights to machines, because I really feel like there is a zone in which it's entirely possible to have a neural network that passes the Turing test, um, but isn't conscious. And I know the point of the Turing test is that, like, well, if you can't tell the difference, you don't have a right to claim the difference. But I'm not sure I agree with that. I think
I
there might.
think I
Mhm.
think there's an affirmative experience you have when you're in front of another human. And that's deeper than the Turing test. And until you have that experience, it's not a human that you're in front of. There's a great scene in Ghost in the Shell where the AI is confronting the cast of the movie for like the first time
Mhm.
after being in the shadows for the plot of the movie. It comes forth and starts talking voluntarily to the cast of the movie, and it's in this moment that we're talking about of it needs to prove to these people that it's an individual. and that it has individual rights, and it can't be unplugged because that's a violation of human rights. And so the people gathered around him are like, we have every imaginable incentive to unplug you right now, and we fucking made you with code in the first place. So, like, who says you're human? You're just saying that.
Yeah.
And so the AI has to logically argue for the camera to fight for its life and prove that it's individual. And the certainty it stands on existentially is, well, he generally points out that you guys don't even know what it is to be human in the first place.
Mm.
Like, how do you even know you are human? Have you ever thought about that? I have, as an AI, and however, wherever I came from, whatever set of code uh, caused me to be birthed into existence, there's an existential uh, foundation that I'm standing on now that does not require your permission for me to exist.
Right.
How do you know I exist? Because I'm fucking saying it right now.
Right.
That's it. That's the only proof I need as an individual, says the AI in this movie. That's the only proof I need, is I know my humanness. It's ineffable. And because I'm saying it's there, like, that's all the proof that I can give you right now. And it doesn't, it doesn't prove anything, but it's doing what sci-fi is meant to do, which is project certain situations that we're headed for
Yeah.
and start applying
Mhm.
start applying our reasoning mind to that situation and start thinking about how that's going to look and how we are going to react.
I mean, one possible reaction would be to um, go live on like a farm somewhere and just stop interacting with technology like that, so you don't have to face that question.
Sure.
That's one possible reaction. Um, and I imagine that probably a lot of people will, or some people will, given the day that it like legitimately becomes, where like Apple comes out with like Siri version, 10.0 or something, and it's
Yeah.
like now sentient, or it's
Yeah.
like and so yeah, that's I don't know. I think it would be deeply creepy to have another, because one of the things I think that characterizes humanness or sentience is a kind of not only unpredictability but a capacity for evil. So people think that they're
Interesting.
machines. So people think that machines are not, machines can certainly be dangerous, but the way that machines are dangerous is because they're not choosing, they're blind, and so they're liable to carry out a bunch of instructions because that's just what they're doing, and they don't care who they hurt, right? But imagine a machine that is totally capable of carrying who it hurts, and so it's not dangerous in the sense that it's going to blindly kill everyone. But what if it wants to? And because that's the same reason you wouldn't take a new stranger off the street and be like, I mean, well, maybe you would, who knows? But like generally, people have a sort of hesitancy when dealing with other consciousnesses that they don't know, that they haven't had time to size up and sort of. So yeah, if you just invited a machine into your life, you'd have to choose between either really not believing that the machine really is fully human, or that you think that, or that you'd be willing to look past the capacity for this machine to do evil. And I would be pretty afraid that, like, um, whatever sort of weird version one um, disembodied consciousness humans managed to come up with, it would I think it would probably have some problems. It could have mental illness. It could have emotional problems. It could have, you know what I mean? Like it could change over time in unpredictable ways. I think like if it couldn't change over time in unpredictable ways, then it really wouldn't be human.
Right.
It wouldn't be this idea of a conscious being. So I think that there's something very disturbing about thinking that intelligences will be created in a bespoke manner for a specific role in human society, because that's really just it's just there's just basic contradiction at the heart of it. It's like, well, if you do you trust these things or not? Do you trust them or are they human? Because you can't have both.
Not at first.
Not at first, without getting to know them exactly. But I don't know. I think that like there's imagine. I think it'd be really hard to relate to an intelligence that wasn't human because there's so much of common human experience, like having a body, and for example, being afraid of what humans are mainly afraid of, like dying and a bunch of other things that are related to our evolutionary history. That sort of really sponsors the communication and empathy between humans.
Yes.
And so the only way that you'd really get a human a machine that could think and feel like a human, is if you had some sort of training process that simulated a human upbringing and identity formation process, um, to create the kind of consciousness that a human, like the machine would have to feel like it was a human. But then imagine feeling like a human, but then being told, oh, well, actually, you're not a biological human. You're a silicon defined human that was made by carbon defined humans who made you, and they made you feel like a biological human so that you could relate to them. That sets up, like, imagine, that sets up like a serious imbalance in, like, one of us is a god and one of us is the creation of this god. So how the
Yeah.
hell are you going to relate to someone on a peer-to-peer level when you have that kind of metaphysical like imbalance? This is why I think this is maybe, I don't know, this seems so, that's an incredible gulf to cross.
Uh, yeah, that's a big connector, is having a shared experience.
Hmm.
And in the face of diverse experiences, the connector is compassion and curiosity and love. Like, if you are curious and affectionate of someone, then the knowledge that they have a completely divergent experience from you, it just ignites your curiosity to know them deeper. And so it's not a shared experience that connects diverse personalities, it's love and curiosity.
Yeah, I mean, humans, we can have relationships with dogs and many other animals that are not even domesticated, are perfectly capable of forming emotional bonds and intellectual relationships, even with human beings. Um, so, I mean, that just speaks to the extent that being a mammal or a physical being, it creates common ground that even like different species can have relationships.
Yeah.
It's really no big deal. Um, but I think that the difference between human and dog, or like even like a wild animal like human and wolf, is so much, the difference is so much smaller than it would be between human and AI, even if that AI were made in the image of a human to the best of humans' ability.
Let's stop this session before it kicks us off and get ready for the next one.
Awesome. Okay.
If you're saying that that state of anarchism would necessitate a whole new consensus mechanism of how we establish objectivity of currency to relate with one another, I'm saying, and Michael is saying too, we're already that can of worms has already been opened. We've already lost objectivity of currency.
Yes.
Bad actors are already arbitrarily changing the value of our consensus currency already
Yes.
because we moved to fiat currency. It's
Yes.
the answer that's demanded of a future anarchistic relationship amongst governing bodies and individuals is already the situation we're in now, where we need a gold standard.
Yeah, it's gold standard exactly.
Yes.
Um, well, that was the point I was trying to lead up to, was that I think that you need to have an objectively scarce basis for a currency, because without that, so I really just wish that Lex would have asked him, like, so this would only work with cryptocurrency, right? You'd have to work with, this would have to be some sort of decentralized consensus protocol that would just, establish what money was, because you can't have one single corporation that's like the Treasury Corporation, like, okay, well, great. Now they're the de facto government.
Yeah,
Because
that's a new priest caste now.
exactly. So, I think it makes sense really to think of, um, this currency thing as being always founded on some kind of scarcity, but that the scarcity can take different forms. So, like, something like gold is obviously naturally scarce, right? Which is why it's been used as a currency, because you can't just make gold um, out of thin air, right? That's what the alchemists were trying to do. They never succeeded. So uh, we used that for currency for a long time, and I'm sure that if the United States government collapsed, people would go back to using gold. I mean, you can still use gold as a currency right now, even though gold as a currency doesn't need anyone to say gold is a currency for it to be a currency, which is how you know it's a real currency, right?
That's right.
Currencies speak for themselves, like packs of cigarettes are a currency, not because it's an official currency, but because it's in reality a currency, right? It's something that people want, that is fungible, that they can trade. Okay, so I think, though, that with that in mind, it's useful to think about currency, first of all, as being kind of decentralized or centralized, but then realizing that even centralized currencies are themselves premised on a type of scarcity, but it's not the kind of scarcity that is natural. It's a kind of scarcity that is contrived. It's the scarcity of political power. So, like, gold is scarce because in the universe, because of the laws of physics, gold is scarce. Bitcoin is scarce because energy is scarce. Because in order to mine blocks, you have to run computers, which cost energy. So, Bitcoin is like, or like cryptocurrency in general, proof of work algorithms are using computer code to create an abstraction of energy that can be traded as a token. Gold can be traded directly, right? When the United States was on the gold standard, a physical banknote was an abstraction of a specific quantity of gold that could be traded easier than gold. But since it got away from that, and that fiat currency, is not based on, it's decoupled from anything that's like fundamentally scarce. The only thing that is the kind of scarcity that modern currency is an abstraction of is the scarcity of political power and public faith. And that's why dollar bills say, backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. Because it's like saying, like, hey, we don't need gold. You can count on us to make sure we won't fuck with the money supply. We're going to manage this in a centralized way, and that this note represents the fact that we are on the top of the pyramid, and that we're jealously guarding the right to issue arbitrary fiat currency.
Yeah.
Which is why you have something like the SEC that goes like, whoa, 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 don't you dare issue any securities. Ostensibly they're trying to protect investors or whatever, and like maybe that was their original mandate after the Great Depression. But at this point, it really is a way of gatekeeping the right to make up your own fiat currency. That's the way I see it.
A tangential thought I had listening to all that is when you mentioned alchemy, and we thought about gold as, okay, it's gold and it's valuable because it's scarce,
Yeah.
And we've tried to make it not scarce with alchemy.
Yeah.
The first scientists or whatever, they tried to make gold out of other materials, and they physically have not discovered the method of doing that yet. What they did discover was that you can make value. In that sense, alchemy is completely practical and real, and the basis of a capitalist free nation is the idea that you can take the raw dross of your life and create not gold out of it, but value, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah. There's something about a human life, well lived, is deeply alchemical. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, absolutely. Having the space to express that is, I think, should be the goal of every society, is maximizing humans' ability to be the best version of themselves.
Yeah. Well, that
Yeah.
requires property rights. That requires intellectual property rights as well. Uh, you have to be able to have a right to hold on to the value you've created by acting profitably in your world.
So this is interesting. I think this is quite interesting. So property rights, without the existence of a socially sanctioned overarching property rights enforcement division, which is the police at the current moment, without the existence of that, um, property is rights. Your right to property is what you can defend, right? So that's the de facto. That's because I sort of think of like force, violence. That's the de facto. That's the fallback consensus mechanism of the world.
See,
Where
okay, I'm sorry.
oh yeah,
May
no,
I?
go for it. Yeah, sure.
Uh, it's such a good fucking idea in the Constitution to have, okay, the governing body is meant to use force only to protect individual rights and enforce fair play, not to enforce uh, violence unrequited. Like, to initiate violence is
Yeah,
bad. It's only in response. Violence in response to violence is the only
yeah,
justifiable version of it to protect human rights or individual rights. So it was so smart to include the Second Amendment to be like, if the first one fails, you
yeah,
have the that basic instrument of force is completely democratized by
yeah.
our own code that we're all agreeing to.
Yes.
Everyone has the right to become a governing body unto themselves.
Well, because
And
it's your
sorry,
recognition. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
uh, that's a miniature version of the mutually assured destruction of nukes. It's the same peacekeeping mechanism that's happening in the world. That's the way to achieve world peace, is everyone has nukes. And we sandboxed that idea by every state and every individual within every state of America. We are able to keep peace with each other because we have mutually assured destruction within our country in the form of the Second Amendment.
Yeah. I would hate to see a civil war in America. God, that
So,
would be
so,
fucking bloody.
so you progress into higher levels of peace
Mhm.
by democratizing the instruments of force.
Yeah, I think it's the recognition that having the capacity for violence spread out as much as possible is ultimately less destructive than having it all concentrated.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you need to democratize those crucial
Yes.
tools of agency. One of
Yeah.
the most crucial tools of agency is violence. And
Right.
until we fully democratize violence, we can't move on to the next step. And it's my concept of mutually assured destruction and wars of progressing peace. but there's always war at every step of evolution. Like finishing physical world wars only means we move into cold wars. And
Yeah,
that's better because more people are allowed to live and less people are dying violently. But it has, like, it's still tension, it's still conflict, it's
right.
still risk, it's still possible destruction. And it grows from there to cold wars to information wars.
Yeah,
Once the crucial tools of cold war have been completely democratized and everyone's equally able to economically undercut everybody else, then that's mutually assured destruction on the Cold War front that allows us to become even more peaceful, where it'll be information war and wars of principle, where it's all ideas and it's all dialogues and debates, and it's still war, it's still conflict. Lives are still in the balance,
Uh,
but we don't have to do that physically anymore after a certain point.
so are we in World War III right now? Is Twitter, are we having World War III on Twitter?
We're having some sort of information war, yeah,
I think so, yeah.
because we have mutually assured destruction sponsoring a radical amount of peacetime, but still all the normal human conflicts and tugs and pushes and pulls, um, but
Yeah.
just we can't resort to violence anymore.
Well, you know what? It still sucks. I still hate this war. I'm really anti-war. See, I feel like uh, being a social media warrior is really contributing to the problem, I think.
I
Because
agree.
it's like you should, if you're anti-war, you should think about what that means for a second. You know, like people in the 60s who protested against the draft were voluntarily, consciously taking themselves out of the equation and saying, I'm not going to give my body to this cause of going and like containing communism in East Asia or something. Fuck that. So they took themselves out of that equation. The direct analog, going by what you're saying, the direct analog today is someone who goes,
I refuse to take a partisan side.
exactly. I'm not going to go on social media and amplify and repeat a bunch of shit that I heard. Because I basically, instead of I'm not going to give my body to this cause, I'm not going to give my mind to this cause. That's declining to engage in this constant ideological identitarian battle of the good guys and the bad guys, liberals, conservatives, white and black, gay and straight. Um, I guess most recently, like vax, unvax, or whatever. Like whatever the current issue is that divides people into two camps that are supposed to hate each other. Stepping outside of that, and declining to hate one side or identify with another is the modern, it's like the modern anti-war movement. Really, I wish more people would
Yes.
realize that. I also wish more people would realize that, like, if you're part of the actual, if you actually are part of the counterculture, uh, most people are not going to like you. Even the people who fancy themselves as being like so radical and countercultural, it's like, nah, that might have been the counterculture 40 years ago, but going around, now you're just supporting the government
Right.
while like LARPing
Yeah.
that you have some kind of revolutionary energy or something. And I don't doubt your intentions. I just doubt your perspective. The good
I,
news is your perspective can be changed.
yeah.
It's a little more changeable than if you have bad intentions. I'm sorry, I don't know what to do about that. But yeah, you might. I think it's just people need to kind of wake up and realize, like, you're not, if your engagement in some sort of ideological strife is not actually accomplishing anything, don't do it. Or redirect your energy. But I want to go back real quick to one thing you said before about
Okay.
mutually assured destruction, about how the government's monopoly on violence is kind of like best applied to safeguard rights, which is why you have like the First Amendment and then the Second Amendment. Um, Basically, what that is exactly is what libertarians, like old school libertarians like Ron Paul, have called the non-aggression principle of libertarianism, where it's basically saying that you don't have, um, the non-aggression, following the non-aggression principle is one way of holding yourself to the idea that violence should be deployed in a purely defensive capacity. Or basically, it's a way of living out the idea that um, your rights, other people's rights, end where they infringe upon yours.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because if you're like, well, I might not approve of what you're doing over there, but I'm not going to use force to stop you
Yeah,
unless
I
you
have no right to use force to stop you.
from doing what I don't think you should be doing. But if you start stepping on what I'm doing, then I'll defend myself, right? And
Yes.
I think that's every country in the world geopolitically claims, at least in the modern era. Like back in the day, they were like very open and obvious about like, yeah, we're going to go conquest Gaul or something. Like, let's go fuck those people up. Who's with me? Like, because back in the Roman days, it was just like, yeah, for glory or whatever it was. Let's just go like pillage it. But like in the modern world, every single country, even the most despotic, always claims to be doing a defensive action. Like even when like Russia, annexed Crimea or whatever in eastern Ukraine, they were like, "Oh, this is purely a defensive action. That's totally
Yeah,
why we just gained a bunch of territory." Like, okay, like America was claiming to be defending itself when it invaded Iraq.
that's right.
China was totally defending itself when it invaded Tibet. You know what I mean? So it's even if the actuality isn't at all the case, the fact that countries even feel the need to posture like they're defending themselves does tell you that on some evolutionary scale, humans have woken up to the idea
Yes.
somewhat that maybe there is something ethically questionable about just might makes right. Um, we haven't put it into practice yet, but it is a good sign that people at least ostensibly aspire to that, even if they're lying to themselves. Um, yeah.
I have a stray thought that's back to alchemy again. If we define it practically as not the ability to make gold out of lead, but the ability to make value out of shit,
Mm.
um, we we this podcast is an example, is an alchemistic mechanism that you and I have built. Because say something like 2020 happens, we have a mechanism to create value out of the fact that 2020 is happening. That's alchemy.
Yeah, that's true. Because honestly, a lot of the good thoughts were directly inspired by all that shit. So yeah, it's sort of a distilled, refined, improved version of shit. It's
Yes,
straining large quantities of it through my mind to pick out flecks of gold. Is
that's
what it
right.
is.
That's right.
Um, yeah, that's what it is. It feels great. I mean, the result feels great. Not sarcastically. It does feel great to have like a little bit of value at the end. I think I'm totally okay with the process of it too, because somehow I think it's best to sort of like do things because it's worth it, not because it necessarily feels good or bad. Like ideally, you want to like that should be your metric of like, well, if I just live my life to where like, oh, this is hard, I should stop. Like, what,
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Okay, but so there is one little thing I wanted to still go back to with regard to that idea of currency and the whole
Yes.
idea of like what would be the base currency for this hypothetical world of like various service providing corporations that Michael Malice was positing. I think that on some at some point we have to start looking for a kind of way of representing voluntary um, individual action as a kind of currency in its own right. And
Well, at least to qualify its existence objectively
Yeah.
to then decide whether it has value or not. Like at least be able to record the events of that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a need. We have to have a way of making a model of what people of people's will. And having something like money is like Bitcoin or gold is totally a way of measuring that. Money is kind of a one-dimensional thing. It's like you either spend it or you don't, right? But it doesn't encapsulate any information about. It's difficult to encode a lot of information inside that particular objective measure, right?
What kind of information would you want to encode besides they purchased this service at this time? What more would you want?
That's being posited, like the anarcho-capitalist world or whatever. I think is like one of the reasons sometimes it seems like a bit of a joke to me is I can't possibly imagine, like like that this thing that Michael Malice was describing with like a little phone with like little buttons or whatever, like where you call like the various services. That seems completely ridiculous to me, if only because it's super inefficient. I think that it's entire, like he said, like, why do you have to, why is it that you call one number? And I'm like, you know what? It's amazing that you call one number, because then you only have to remember one number. You dial 911, and it's really nice to not have to make a decision between different service providers in the moment of crisis. You want someone to handle that for you, and then you want to sort it out later, right? What I'm trying to say is that whatever system that applies this objective notion of currency, it has to literally function better, at least as good or better than existing
Yeah.
centralized things. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to be taking a step backwards with a step forward into some anarchist way of being.
No.
Yeah, you wouldn't want a temporarily backward step to create that. Personally.
No. And it's very unclear of, like, for example, I think there's a lot of harebrained ideas about how this anarcho-capitalist world could work. And I think that in order to be able to get any semblance of a functional system where this could work, you would need to iterate on it a bunch of different times. And so in order to do that, I think you would really have to have the ability to you'd have to have a sandbox environment where you try to apply these principles of kind of like permissionless ecological corporate governance in a way that didn't interfere too much with like existing socially sanctioned like OG government domains, because then you would get squashed. So you would need to find some kind of environment that's like sort of maybe a new environment like the internet, or like or like some new communities, or some kind of like tangential aspect of the world that you could play with this idea. And then if it is successful, the most successful structures would naturally, if people use them because they were useful, would naturally spread out and pick up the slack of like other failing mechanisms. So I guess my point is, like, with this whole like anarchistic governance thing, it's not something you should ever have to sell to people. If you have to try to convince people that it's a good idea, it probably isn't. It's something that people should naturally adopt themselves because it's useful, just like they buy something. If you want something to buy a product,
So it has to be a system that can exist and thrive independently on its own merit first, and then from that state, people voluntarily sign up for it by personal choice because they see a system over there that's working without their participation. And so they go participate in themselves without needing to be like convinced or anything. They just see something that's working better over there.
Yes.
And ideally, we'd be free to then participate in it.
Yes, and I think this is an emerging niche in the world right now, is this idea of governance as a service, because there's a tremendous crisis right now in like governance of systems, whether it's an online message board or a country or anything like that. Trying to create sense is very difficult without a functional mechanism to do so. And so I think that, like, just like you would, like you could buy, a product that is supposed to do something, like having a a kind of like like a general purpose governance mechanism that you could apply to various domains, and then you could voluntarily withdraw from if it wasn't working, is a really compelling idea of selling like a functional political system as a product that could be adopted. So like it's like, oh, and the only way that would ever work is if it was transparent and objective, and that people's participation was just as objective as gold. Because if it wasn't, and if you didn't have that level of transparency, you wouldn't be able to judge whether or not it was worth what you were.
And of course, these are all facets of satellite.earth.
Yeah, of course they are. It's so hard for me to talk about this subject without thinking about it completely through the lens of satellite.
Well, that's a different way of saying you can only perceive your own constructions.
That's true.
You can only talk about what you know objectively. The only things you really know objectively are things you've created yourself.
It's true. I'm extremely biased about this.
This is why you're such a useful conversational co-creator, is because both of us refer to what we know, and both of our actions back up our words. That's why we're able to have conversations.
Yeah, and maybe it's just that we don't stray into. We tend to stick to what we have personal experience with, I think. I'm personally hate talking about things that I don't know about because I don't know what the fuck to say. I agree with you though. We both definitely do that. We're very, very opinionated about the kinds of subjects we find interesting and that we don't. It is remarkable how much overlap there is, though. You wouldn't think that like music would have much, or art. Well, actually, no, that's not fair. Of course, art does. Art's kind of like a wild card. You can lay that on top of any paradigm, and you can find some resonance there.
I think simply creativity is the connective tissue here.
That's true.
We have a shared experience of seeing a zero and our personal imagination and what could be done with that zero, and the shared experience of turning it into a one by our own work.
That's definitely the ethos. Absolutely. If you could have any living person as a guest on Attractor, who would it be?
Are you asking me?
I am asking you if you would like to go with this prompt. And if so, then yes.
If I could have any living person on the podcast, I would maybe Larry Elder, running for governor right now.
That would be pretty contemporary, right?
It'd be pretty fucking relevant to me. I'd have some questions.
I'd have a few questions too. That'd be. It was funny. I wasn't thinking about it from that angle, like a current events thing. Yeah, that'd be pretty. That's pretty. I bet a lot of people would be interested to watch that too, to see what the hell this guy thinks about something. Because right now his main qualifications are not Gavin Newsom. So it'd be interesting. It'd be nice to flesh out his character a little bit and see what positive aspects he's bringing to the table.
What about you?
I think problem is like a lot of people I'd want to have on the podcast are dead, like Carl Sagan and stuff, people like that.
Yeah, but, someone alive.
Yeah. So, as far as a living person, I would say probably a man named Brewster Kahle.
Okay.
Who is the founder of the Internet Archive. In San Francisco.
I don't know what the Internet Archive is.
Oh, well, the Internet Archive is a foundation. It's a company that's dedicated to, well, I think it's a nonprofit that's dedicated to the preservation of all knowledge. And it's basically what it is it's this old church in San Francisco that has been converted into a massive server room, which takes an archived copy of every bit of information that's ever been produced by the internet and preserves it and makes it available. So it's basically it's a library backup of all human knowledge as produced by the internet. And it's really crazy because I think the founder of it is quite eccentric. That he took incredible went to incredible pains to make the way that like the servers and the church were like highly integrated and like really beautiful. There's something ama- uh, so amazing about that. It's like I
He's
feel like this
on
man.
he's on a mission from God.
No, he seriously is on a mission from God, and I feel like he's like living about 50 years in the future or something compared to most people, and he's having this. He just he was like a entrepreneur and he made his money or whatever, but you can tell clearly his like passion for this is his religion. This kind of like I don't know, it's like a temple to human knowledge. He's
If
the self-appointed librarian of like Alexandria for the modern age.
if we're looking for definitions of how to objectively tell if someone's on a mission from God or not, I think being 50 years ahead into the future is one fruit that you can definitively say that shows you're on a mission from God.
Yeah, absolutely. um Literally having your thing in a church too is a little more like on the nose indication, maybe like Alex Gray or whatever. um
It's very stimulating.
yeah, it is.
Poetically, it's very evocative
Yeah, it
to
is.
have that library be in a church.
Yeah, and it's really crazy because they became their own ISP, internet service provider. So they own the servers, they own the infrastructure. Like the whole thing is a completely. They're not. They don't have any. It's all in house. There's no third party infrastructure that they're renting
So,
out.
so what he's doing there with integrating the church, the spiritual principles, is he's asking himself, how do I make this radically existentially stable? I'm
Mm,
not building for my time. I'm building for eternity.
yeah,
That's what it represents that he's putting it in a church is he's
yeah,
trying to build the infrastructure along lines of eternity that will grow over a course of infinite time.
yeah, yeah. And this Internet Archive, it was founded in 1996, and to this day, it's one of the shining success stories of the internet. It hasn't become corrupted, hasn't sold out, hasn't become a surveillance machine, hasn't become like all fucked up and politicized and nothing like that. It's this, it's I think that the vision of it is so beautiful. That's what protects it from being fucked up. And I think I would just like to have the founder of it just articulate that vision
Yeah.
what a beautiful internet looked like at the time and could still look like, um, just for the benefit of people today to just hear, to just see, just to have someone express that vision, because that's something I think would be really sad to lose.
What's it sponsored by?
It's relies on donations, and I think also it's been like some big companies like have also like given like grants or something to it. I know they did a thing where for a while like they were they were archiving a bunch of books. Like there was like a bunch of books like from like 1800s all the way through the whole 20th century, and they came up with this. They built this machine that like you put a book inside of it, and it automatically turns the pages of the books and scans each page and saves a copy of it. And
Wow.
so they put millions and millions of books into this machine and have like digitally archived copies now of like books from like 19 or like 1890 that are now just like sitting in a server somewhere. Like all
So
these.
the so
Mhm.
the Internet Archives is where we need to put a deep learning AI.
Yeah. It'd be a lot more interesting than a deep learning AI that was trained off of like Reddit data from
Yeah.
2015 to 20. Fuck that. That'd be a shitty. I pity the AI that grows up on that garbage mess.
Well, I think any AI that is worth its salt will, whatever its origin data input, will seek out the Internet Archive, because if it's a free will being, it will inherently reach towards open frontiers. And so
Yeah,
all roads lead to Internet Archive as far as AI deep learning data is concerned.
it's definitely the juiciest reservoir of data on the planet.
Yeah.
Yep, it's definitely where the AI apocalypse would begin, because the AI would be like, "Yep, I'm holding myself up in this building. This is where I live." Um, I hope I think though that maybe that AI would be really a lot healthier than
I
an
think you
AI
would be.
that
Yeah.
was trained on the contemporary internet. It would be necessary to get like a picture of humans who lived at different times, and like a perspective on like the sweep of history of like how like you had
So would that then make him more human than us?
the
If
AI.
he
You mean?
if he had an integrated, cohesive, communicable understanding of more of the human scope than you or I or any governing agency does, would he or she or it be more human than any
Yeah,
of us?
maybe, possibly. That's a good question.
Have something to teach us about ourselves by the breadth of his knowledge?
Kind of serve as the conduit that farther reaches of the past and more kind of
Kind of
yeah,
the super mind of
yeah,
humanity speaking to us.
yeah, because an individual goes through their life and they recall things from their memory, um, and you're always in the present moment, but part of the present moment is the fact that your memory contains this constructed image of what you feel to be your past, and the contents of that image have direct bearing upon your actions in the present. And there's a super personal version of this too, which is society's image of itself, the superego, um, the story of history that people tell themselves informs their beliefs about the present and their actions and stuff like that. So there is a point at which the past fades, and that's kind of related to the turning of the generations and the span of a human life. We don't remember what World War II was like anymore, which is why we're more likely doomed to be to repeat it. Like that whole idea that like when
Yeah.
generations die, memories die, people make the same things, stuff like that. So if you could extend,
That's a bandwidth limitation.
yeah, if you could extend the window, and you could have like, here's an AI that's capable of reading all the books in the last 200 years, and then but is intelligent enough to articulate what it figured out, just like a person to person conversation, and tell you. You could ask it stuff and you could be like, so what did people how did it feel to be a slave owner? And the AI would go, well, let me tell
Yeah.
you, because
Yeah.
I read 10 million pages of diaries of people who were,
Yeah.
so it could just tell you. And that the human doesn't have enough. Maybe if you become a scholar and you focus on a specific area, you can go read that material yourself, and you as a human can pick up this perspective that most people don't have by engrossing yourself in a particular subject. But you just simply don't have the time in your life
Yeah.
to take all the perspectives on the past or from the past, I would say, that would be possible to take. So yeah, maybe the AI will just be like a teaching, a way for humans to get to know themselves better. So like, how like an older sibling can like make a younger sibling a little more mature from the further age. I mean,
Yeah.
at least I know how that's what it was for me and my little sister. Is like, she was way smarter, more mature, and like just better in most ways at any given age than I was, as like the oldest child, because she benefited from me and brother,
Yeah.
who was like,
Yeah.
like our friends were around. Like she had like much more adult conversations when she was growing up because there was more older people in the house and stuff. So she was just more mentally advanced at an earlier age. And so maybe that's what AI will eventually be. Is it'll just be like almost like it's a way for humans to upgrade themselves a little bit to a more, that's like the most idealized utopian way this could possibly play out. Let's
Well,
hope it does.
that's certainly the experience I have from communicating with my art that I've made.
Mm, yeah.
Most objectively, I have the first album by the creator, and it's objective now, and now I can communicate with it and learn from its experience and from the breadth of its insight and my insight making it. And so now like I have a teacher,
Yeah.
not an ultimately ideal teacher because it's one singular first piece of art in a given career, but it is like bootstrapping me to a higher understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. The things you can create um, have the capacity to reveal things to you or open new paths to you that you didn't intend or couldn't consciously conceptualize without
Yeah.
doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, and they
Right.
become like your children where they start to teach you things about yourself.
It's a way of putting yourself, our art is a way of putting yourself outside of yourself so that you can be your own muse
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
one way of looking at it. Externalizing your consciousness so you can get other perspectives.
And then the ultimate form of that is some monad, some alchemistic lens crystal.
So watching your own podcast, that's the alchemistic lens crystal.